pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Old Bridge Township Planning Board has been provided in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act at least 48 hours prior to the commencement of the meeting by one primarily posting in the municipal complex, an announcement giving the time, date, location, and agenda of this meeting, two, mailing such announcement to the Home Rule Tribune, and three, filing a copy of such announcement with the municipal clerk. Mr. Abbas?
Here.
Mr. Lauer?
Here.
Mr. Schmitz?
Here.
Mr. Lenning?
Here.
Mr. Pink?
Here.
Mr. Luca?
Here.
Chairman Cannon?
Here.
Ms. Caring?
Here.
Ms. Luant? Ms. Shapiro?
Okay, you're going to swear her in now? Sure. Nicole, do you want to introduce our new?
Cannon had the opportunity to meet our new township planner, Vina Sawant, earlier after she accepted the position. She's been with us for the last month, and I wanted to introduce her to you all. And if you looked at her planning memo tonight, you can get a taste or a flavor of sort of the detail that she provides to the board in her review memos. It's been a pleasure to work with her for the last month. In the last month, especially learning planning from a true planner. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to see, what we hold for the township in the years to come. So I just wanted to welcome Vina and introduce her to the board.
Vina, let's swear you in so that, and this will be for as long as you're a consultant for the board. We're not going to do it for every hearing or even every year, but we'll do it once in the beginning, and you're sworn forever, okay? So raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you'll be giving in front of this board for the duration of your appointment as township planner will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, we've 20-18P is a completeness waiver request for the Group Academy, the learning experience.
Yes.
Okay.
Madam-
Yes, Mr. Himmel.
Madam Chairman, nice to see you again, members of the board. I am David Himmelman, and I represent the applicant, as you know from your new planner's memo, dated July 9th. So this is an application for a minor site plan approval with C variance to install an LED sign above the existing freestanding sign. The learning experience franchisee that I represent is currently located on Texas Road. I'm sure you've all maybe passed it in the near future. I mean, in the prior future manner. In any event, this facility was incorporated within the general development plan for Woodhaven, and this board had approved that amended application, site plan application, in 2014 and 15. So this board has jurisdiction over any amendments technically to that general development plan, and your planner so noted that in her memo. The reason we're here tonight is there were several items that your planner requested that we follow up with on completeness waivers. We've submitted all of them with the exception of the survey. And the reason why a request is being made for the survey is because Woodhaven is still being built out. So to have a current survey would just depict vacant land. So rather, we submitted copies of the plats that have been filed, which really depicts the information that the survey would otherwise have anyway. Your planner's memo of July 9th, I think, recognized that, and she recommended that the board consider the waiver request, and then obviously we would be deemed complete and can have the matter heard before the board for the variance. Thank you.
Did you want to comment, or no? Your memo speaks for itself. Okay. Does the board have any questions or comments? Okay, can we have a motion then for the waiver request? Moved by Mr. Schmidt,
I'll second.
seconded by Mr. Payne. Roll call, please.
Yes.
Mr. Lauer?
Yes.
Mr. Schmitz?
Yes.
Mr. Lenning?
Yes.
Mr. Pink?
Yes.
Mr. Luca?
Yes.
Chairman Cannon?
Yes.
Thank you, and Dawn
Okay.
will let me
See
know
you.
when this will be agendized. Okay, good night, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Okay, the minutes for June 12th, 2018. Do I have a motion?
I'll move it.
Moved by Mr. Luca, roll call. Second.
I'll second.
And Mr. Schmidt, roll call.
Mr. Boss?
Yes.
Mr. Lauer?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Lenning?
Yes.
Mr. Pink?
Yes.
Mr. Luca?
Yes.
Chairman Cannon?
Yes. Okay, resolutions, can we do these together, or is it a different roll call? Okay. For Manzo Old Bridge Properties and American Plaza 3, do we have a motion?
I'll move it.
Moved by Mr. Schmidt, second.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Pink, roll call, please.
Mr. Boss?
Yes.
Mr. Lauer?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Lenning?
Yes.
Mr. Pink?
Yes.
Mr. Luca?
Yes.
Chairman Cannon?
Yes. Okay, before we start, I just want to remind everyone, or the television audience, that we're being televised and that cameras will be on until 10 o'clock, and then they will go away, but the meeting may still be in progress. Okay, 11-18P, Woodhaven Village Phase 3. Amended preliminary and final site plan and major subdivision, residential and non-residential with C variances. Oh, they want to be continued. Okay, till August 7 without further notice. Okay, is there a motion to grant them the continuance? Moved by Mr. Lenning. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Schmidt.
Mr. Boss? Yes. Mr. Lauer?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mr. Lenning?
Yes.
Mr. Pink?
Yes.
Mr. Luca?
Yes.
Chairman Cannon?
Yes.
Okay, so anyone who is here on the Woodhaven Village 3, Woodhaven Boulevard, this is block 22001, lot 2.13, that will not be heard this evening. We're going to continue and hear that on August 7th. There will not be an additional notice going out. If you want to check before you come down to make sure it's actually on August 7th, you can give a call to the planning office the day of the hearing to make sure it's going forward.
Okay, and then we have 17-18P, Route 516 Development LLC, major site preliminary and finals with C variance, who is also requesting to be continued to September 11th, 2018, without further notice.
Dante Alfieri on behalf of the applicant. Good evening. We are actually going to request, if we could, a special meeting in August, if that's a possibility with the board. I understand that there's two potential dates, one being August 14th and the other being August 21st, because I understand August 7th is jam-packed with applications.
Okay, and we don't have anything else. How does the board feel about a special meeting on the 14th or the 21st? Who's available on the 14th?
I'm available.
You're available. That's it? We have to have a quorum, so, okay, so Mr. Lenning and Mr. Schmidt. What about you, Mr. Pink? You're what?
He's looking.
Oh, you're checking your calendar. Mr. Luca?
I'm checking too.
Looks like we can make that.
Mr. Lauer? Oh, Mr. Boss? No. Okay, so we had one, two,
I'm available on the 14th.
are you okay?
On the 14th, yes.
5. We've got 6.
6, and there's 2 members who aren't here this evening, so perhaps they could be available.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have a quorum, we can't hear it, but
I understand that.
we'll push for that. Okay, so, so there won't be any, they don't need to notice?
So if we announce it this evening, they will not need to renotice. So we're going to announce that the Route 516 Development Block 14262.11, Lot 1, Route 516 and Cottrell Road, minor site plan with C variances will be continued to August 14th. It's a Tuesday. It's a special meeting. We will be noticing, we will need to file a special notice for the hearing itself. But that's not the mailed notice to the neighbors. That's just a special notice because that wasn't noticed at the beginning of the year as one of our planned meetings. So we'll need to coordinate to do that. But there won't be an additional mailed notice. So again, just like the other one, if anybody's here for the Route 516 development, It's going to be carried to August 14th. You will not receive additional notice in the mail, but you can call the planning board office that day to find out that it's really going to be on, so you don't have to come out if it's not going to be here, okay?
Thank
August
you.
14th.
It'll be 7:30 in this
Thank you.
chambers.
Thanks for the accommodation.
Okay, and then we have application 6-18P DMK Development, major site plan preliminary and final with C variances.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Damian Del Duca. I'm an attorney representing the applicant DMK Development. I have with me Chris Kettler, who is with DMK Development. He's flown in from Michigan to be with us tonight. Our engineer, who's getting set up, Josh Seawald with Dynamic Engineering, and our traffic engineer, Justin Taylor with Dynamic Traffic. We're here tonight before the board for a proposed tractor supply at 1976 Old Bridge, Englishtown Road. And that property is 6.71 acres, and it's in the CN zone where this use is a permitted use. The site, as I mentioned, is 6.71 acres. However, a significant portion of the site is constrained with wetlands and flood hazard area, which we'll talk more about this evening, and the net result of which is that we have uplands on which we can develop, but it's substantially less than 6.71 acres. The approvals that we seek tonight are preliminary and final major site plan approval for a 19,097 square foot tractor supply store. In addition to that building size, there's outdoor display areas that are shown on the plan that are noted in your professionals' review letters. And we propose 75 parking spaces, which you'll hear testimony tonight is more than adequate for a tractor supply, but yet requires a variance under your ordinance. We do request several variances, but our engineer and planner, Mr. Seawald, will testify to those. I won't get into those so we don't duplicate things. And several waivers, which we'll also provide testimony on. We've received your engineer and planner's letter, which is a combined letter dated July 2nd, 2018, as well as your fire marshal's letter dated May 30, 2018. And we're going to address, or certainly try to address, the comments set forth in those letters. And I think by and large, we can comply with the recommendations in those letters with a few exceptions that we'll provide testimony on this evening. I have exhibits, and on the screen tonight, you'll see the first exhibit, which is marked A1. And what I can do, and I'll have our witness just authenticate these, but I have 5 planned exhibits, A1 through A5. I brought 11 by 17 color copies for everyone here, just so that you can see it more easily as opposed to turning your heads to see the screen. We also have them on a board, so hopefully we have that covered. I'll hand them out, and then I'll tell you what they are, and then we'll provide some testimony unless the board has questions. That's for the transfer. I have a couple extras if there's anyone here from the public who would like to see them. I'll just put them on the table. So Exhibit A1 is an aerial. It's up on the screen now. That's A1. Exhibit A2 is a rendered site plan dated June 12th, 2018, which is the site plan that was submitted with the application, just with color added so that you can see it more easily. Exhibit A3 are building elevations showing the proposed building from the 4 different sides. Exhibit A4 is a floor plan of the building, the inside of the tractor supply. And Exhibit A5 is the survey that was submitted, the Alta survey that was submitted with our application dated January 29, 2018. So on the screen now is Exhibit A1, which is an aerial photograph. This shows you the site, presumably from a Google image. It is largely an unimproved site. There is a small residence on the property today and a garage in the rear of the site. You can see from the aerial that there's a large stormwater management basin to the east or to the top away from Old Bridge Englishtown Road that services an adjacent residential development, which I believe is called Woodhaven Terrace. The constrained portion of the site is roughly, very roughly, the right half of the site, a significant portion of which is wooded today and will remain wooded. Texas Road, as you look at this exhibit, would be to your left. The Wawa at that corner would be to your left. If we could go to, well, why don't we stay on that exhibit? So those are the exhibits. Unless anyone has any questions for that, we're prepared to dive right into testimony, first from Mr. Seawald, our engineer and planner, and then Mr. Kettler will provide information, testimony on Tractor Supply operations that you may be interested in, and finally, our traffic engineer, Mr. Taylor.
I get just one in. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please state and spell your name for the record.
Josh Seawald, Josh, Seawald, Sewald. I'm from Dynamic Engineering Consultants.
Do you want to put some qualifications in the?
I will begin with that, yes. Mr. Seawald, are you with Dynamic Engineering?
Yes, sir.
And was the site plan set that was submitted to the board and that we're presenting tonight prepared under your direct supervision?
Yes,
And you personally familiar with the site and the surrounding area?
yes,
Can you share your professional qualifications for the board?
certainly. I'm a licensed engineer and planner in the state of New Jersey. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering. I presented and been accepted as an expert of over 30 land use boards, licensed in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland, and I'm a partner at Dynamic Engineering Consultants.
And have you qualified as an expert in professional engineering and professional planning before many New Jersey boards over the years?
Yes.
We'd ask the board to accept Mr. Seawald as an expert in engineering and
I'll
planning.
accept.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Now, before you get into the site plan and the existing conditions, well, using Exhibit A1, can you give the board an overview of the environmental constraints that affect this property that I alluded to?
Certainly. So the southern property line, which will be the property line to the right side of that exhibit that you have in front of you, is a stream called Barclay Brook. So about half the property on the southern half, right along Old Bridge Englishtown Road, with that stream has a flood hazard area, a floodway, a riparian buffer, and various pockets of wetlands that also have wetlands buffers associated with them. So approximately 50% of the site, which is about 6.7 acres, is undevelopable due to the environmental constraints.
Why don't we go to Exhibit A2 if we can?
Certainly.
And that is the rendered site plan that I mentioned, correct?
That is correct.
And while you're starting to talk about that, I'll bring it up on the board, just in case anyone wants to see it. Before you get into the site plan, there's a jagged line that runs roughly from the site from east to west, away from the road. Is that the flood hazard area line?
That is the 100-year floodplain, correct?
So is it correct that, is it correct that everything to the right or south of that jagged line is constrained?
Correct.
And everything to the left is what we would consider uplands?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give the board an overview of the site plan that we propose?
Certainly. So the exhibit that you're looking at, that you have on the screen and on the board here, is a colored version of our site plan and our landscape plan overlaid onto it. The orange hatch is the building, the lighter gray hatch is the concrete area, the darker gray is the pavement parking lot, and green symbolizes open space, trees, shrubs, and landscaping, just so that the board can read the exhibit properly. Walking you through the overall layout, we have looked at the site multiple times and different configurations on how we wanted to lay out the site. As you see, it fronts along Old Bridge Englishtown Road. Half the site is environmentally constrained. The most critical point when you're laying out a commercial development as a permitted use within the zone is how it impacts our surrounding properties. So we really focused on the residential that is on the northern side property line. There's 3 existing homes there today. To the east, although is a residential zone, is a stormwater basin, so that's what I consider, in my professional opinion, a second-tier area of where we're looking to lay our property out. And to the south, as Damien mentioned earlier, that is environmentally restricted. So when we looked to lay this site out, we tried to determine what would be the most activity and the least activity that could possibly impact the 3 residential homes to the north of us. So as I mentioned earlier, the Tractor Supply building in the orange hatch is 19,097 square feet. It has a 15,300 square foot outdoor display area, which I'll discuss more in detail shortly. That is to the east side of us. In front of both of those areas are sidewalk display areas. Then following that, moving further north, is parking. Then you have a trailer display, a buffer, and then you have the residential area. So we decided to put the building to the southern side of the property to minimize our impact to those residential neighbors. The building is about 20 feet, 8 inches tall. The tower feature that's in the front that we'll show shortly on our architectural plans goes up to 30 feet. The loading facilities are in the rear, the trash enclosures in the rear, and our outdoor display operates a little differently than what you may be seeing in other home improvement and similar kind of uses. We allow our vehicles to drive through the outdoor display area to load what they may want on it. I know what you see maybe at a Lowe's or Home Depot, huge garden center, it's more of just pallets and wheeling around. We allow our customers to actually drive through there. So the most activity that comes on this site, I would argue, that is on the southern side. As you proceed northern through the site plan, you have your parking area, cars coming in and out. And out of the 75 parking spaces, there's a row of 24 along that northern side property line that will be leased use. Most of our employees will be directed to park there. It will be the least convenient. We want our customers in a convenient position so they could park up front, closer to the building. And then we do have that 15-foot evergreen tree and shrub buffer area. So I just wanted to walk through with the board why we laid the property out the way that we did. The next thing I'd like to go over is you see some 3 long striped parking spaces right in front of the entrance of the outdoor display area. Those are for a little bit more oversized trucks and or if they have a bed in the back that they want to load up with whatever product we may have in our outdoor display area. That's a prototype space for Tractor Supply. So as we mentioned, 6.7 acres is the property. The existing conditions, the environmental conditions, and the Middlesex County Planning Board right-of-way dedication that we have along Route 527 starts to squeeze our property in with the upland area where it's currently laid out on the Exhibit A2. The hours of operation are Monday to Saturday, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., Monday to Sunday, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., so a little bit shorter on Sunday hours. Employees are typically 12 to 18 throughout the day, depending on peak shift. Deliveries, we get 1 to 2 tractor trailers a week. So not that often, but we do get daily deliveries providing other various products throughout our store. All deliveries, again, are handled in the rear of the store. To the right of the building that I'd like to point out for you, you see this darker gray hatch. That is a metal loading ramp. If you were to see in a much larger facility, some people will actually have a 4-foot sunken loading dock. This is actually a ramp that's that is mounted onto the concrete. So when the truck comes, the dolly and the forklift can come up to grade of that 4 feet. So that whole loading operation and going back through the loading door all happens behind the Tractor Supply building. Thank you. And that's generally the site plan layout. We do have a full movement driveway located on Route 527, which is currently in review with Middlesex County Planning Board. If you would like to go through grading, drainage, and all the other fun stuff.
I'd like to go next to landscaping. Can you
Certainly.
give the board an idea? Well, before I get into landscaping, there was, we've reviewed the professionals' review letter, and one of the first comments in the letter is asking us to consider essentially flipping the site. Making the building be further to the north, closer to the rear of the building to be closest to the 3 residents to the north. Did we consider that, and why do we come up with what we have?
Yes, so after reviewing the memo from your planner and engineer, as well as letting you know that is one of the layouts that we first developed with our applicant, DMK Development, we felt it was more appropriate to move the building further away from the residents. If you were to completely mirror this layout, the back of the building with the loading area, the trash enclosure, the onboarding of the material onto the cars through the outdoor storage display area would be closer to the property line. So assuming we kept a 50-foot side yard setback and buffer requirement for this overall development, if you were in the backyard of the residential, you may be looking at the back of a 21-foot story building. This building is 180 feet now from that property line. So if you were in their backyard, in my opinion, you would see it a little bit further into distance, less impactful on the property. And additionally, the hours of operation, they close at a relatively early time at 9 o'clock, Monday through Saturday, earlier on Sunday. So you won't see that activity that may be impacting someone at the nighttime that we would be concerned about, say, with a 24-hour use or a high turnover operation like a Wawa or a 7-Eleven.
Do I understand correctly that one of the reasons we chose this layout was that the parking that you mentioned that's currently proposed to the north is furthest from the entrance and therefore least likely to be busy?
Correct, so we'll have the least turnover, our employees will park there. It won't be parked all the time, although we do accommodate 75 spaces. We won't have 75 cars on site all day, every single time. You'll see that more during the holidays and possibly a couple peak hours.
So if I'm an employee or a customer and I park in one of those 24 spaces furthest to the north after dark, are my headlights going to shine into any of the homes that are to the north, the 3 homes?
Certainly not. We have a row of shrubs that are along the parking and trailer area, and we also have an additional row of evergreen trees. So any car activity that will be there will not be shining onto that property.
So let's talk about from there into landscaping. What are we proposing on the plan as maybe modified after receiving the professionals' comments in terms of a landscape package?
Certainly. So when we developed this landscape plan with the applicant DMK Development, we have 338 plantings that are throughout the property right now. Various ranges of evergreen trees and shrubs, those are the majority of the plantings. We do have a couple shade trees throughout the property and various ornamental and deciduous shrubs and plantings surrounding the foot of the pylon sign, in addition to a couple landscape islands that are right up front on the upfront parking spaces and the sidewalk near the building. So after reviewing the memo, looking for some additional landscaping, there are a couple things I know my client is happy to do for the board. One of them being the landscape island requirement. One of the code requirements of Old Bridge is after every 20 parking spaces, you're looking to break up that larger 20 parking space row, which would be on the northern side. You would add a landscape island and a shade tree. More than happy to do so. Another requirement that we'll be adding is that they're looking for some additional shade trees throughout the property. We have a ton of evergreens on the north side to buffer to our residential, but we are more than happy to start adding shade trees on the eastern side property line, the southern side property line. That way it would buffer around the side and the back of the property. So we are happy to work with the board and the professionals to continue to add some landscaping, but want everyone to know that there's significant landscaping already proposed on this site. And the last thing we would like to add is that there are some just open space landscape islands that are in the middle of the parking lot. We don't currently show any landscaping. We'd be happy to work with the professionals to add some additional, like a shade tree in the middle, maybe some shrubs around it. That way the parking lot looks like it's fully landscaped.
Okay. There was a comment in the review letter, the July 2nd review letter, relating to an existing bus stop along Old Bridge Englishtown Road. Can you share that comment with the board and try to address it?
Certainly. One of the comments is the driveway location in the best spot due to the potential bus stop that's a little bit further north on our property. And not to defer to my traffic engineer, but he actually has the bus schedule. But overall, we liked this location of the driveway due to the roadway that's in front of us with the 2 lanes. Additionally, this driveway is in the best spot for this site plan layout because it's furthest away from the activity. If you were to enter into the site, you have to maneuver around the parking area to get those upfront spaces right where the front door is, where the customers are coming out. I don't want my main driveway from the Middlesex County Road to be conflicting with that. Secondly, if we were to continue to move the driveway further south,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
If we were to move the driveway.
Further south.
Further south, behind the building, that would be putting like an entrance behind an overall development. So we designed this driveway, which is nice and wide, to accommodate passenger vehicles to safely enter the site. I do not believe it'll have an impact to that bus stop. I do believe that our traffic engineer is going to testify later that those bus stop hours are actually before the store opens Monday through Sunday. So there won't be a conflict with that.
How are we handling stormwater?
Stormwater management, that's a great question. So on site today, although not really improved, there are no stormwater management facilities, not like you would anticipate during a single-family development. Because we are improving about 40% of the property, we will have an underground detention facility in addition to an above-ground detention facility that's connected. And we have various catch basins and conveyance pipes that go throughout the property to collect it. I believe there was there's a few comments in the memo. We're more than happy to address all of them for the engineer as well as the planner. They had some comments about the 100-year storm, some piping. Can we analyze the roof leaders again? We'll be more than happy to address all of those items regarding stormwater management.
And to the best of your knowledge, does the proposed stormwater management do the improvements that you propose meet the applicable ordinances and state regulations?
Certainly.
We require several variances that are outlined in the professional's memo on Table 2, which is on page 4 of that letter, and I'd like to just touch on each of those briefly if we can for the record. The first one is a front yard setback along Old Bridge Englishtown Road. The ordinance requires a 50-foot building setback, and we propose 44.8 feet, which means that we're 5 feet 4 inches short. First of all, can you point out on Exhibit A2 exactly where we encroach into that required setback?
Certainly.
Not really.
How's this?
That's better.
There we go.
Yeah.
So what you could see on the exhibit and in the full civil drawings that you have in front of you is we depicted a building envelope line. This is your front, side, and rear yard setbacks. So front yard setback is 50 feet. Due to the somewhat unique shape of the property, I know on the paper it appears to be rectangular in nature. Going from the north to the southern direction, the property does start to narrow and start to squeeze our buffers and our front yard setbacks. So although we're seeking a front yard setback variance for 44.8 feet, there's a very small building sliver where we don't comply. The rest of the building does fit within that 50 feet. And Damien asked me in the meeting, Josh, why don't you just take this and rotate it to keep it out of the 50-foot setback? It was a great question, and we did have an answer for that. As we take this site plan and shift it just a little bit to the east, and we were to take the building outside of the front yard setback, we would then start to reduce buffer to the residential sides, which is the east and northbound. As you could see, we're trying to provide as much buffer as we can to the north and the east. And we believe that I'd rather seek, and good planning requirement, a small variance due to maybe a unique shape of the property than to squeeze more buffer away from the residential properties.
So does this variance result from the unique shape of the lot?
I believe it results from a unique shape of the lot. In addition to the dedication that we're doing to Middlesex County Planning Board, if we did not have to dedicate this front property, we would be compliant with the 50-foot setback.
So the 44.8 that's proposed takes into account some widening of the county road?
That is correct. And to further even meet the intent of the ordinance, obviously the building setback requirement is drafted in all ordinances, so you could put the building setback from the roadway. Now, our property line is not exactly on the curb line. So if you were to take the distance from the building to the actual curb line of the road, you would meet that 50-foot requirement. It's still a variance legally and technically, but when you're driving along the road, it will appear as if the building is 50 feet plus away from the road.
The next variance is parking in the buffer. The ordinance doesn't permit parking in the required buffer. Can you show the board where we propose parking in the buffer and why we require that variance?
Certainly. There are two buffers that we're providing parking within that we need a technical variance for. There's the northern side, again, to the 3 residential lots, and it's to the eastern side, although it is the residential zone, that's where the stormwater basin is. Our parking is approximately 30 feet from the residential line to the north. There's an additional trailer storage there, but the actual parking is 30 feet from that northern side property line. The parking that is on the eastern side is 11.3 feet.
On the east side, I'll call it the basin side, where the existing basin's immediately to the east, very roughly, what's the distance between that parking and the closest house in that direction?
Well over 300 feet.
What are we doing to offset the reduced buffer on the north side?
So we do have significant plantings, as we testified to earlier. One of the requests and items in the memo that pops up a couple times is asking to see if we can increase this buffer along the northern side property line. I do believe we can take this site plan and shift it. We will be getting closer to that flood hazard area, and we do have that stormwater basin that we're looking to comply with. So we can shift it and increase that 15 to 30-foot buffer that we have now more. I don't know if we might exactly hit the 50, but I do believe we meet the intent of providing various plantings between the parking and the residents. In addition, that is the lowest turnover area.
So is the applicant amenable to shifting the layout to the south to increase the width of the buffer on the north side?
Yes.
But you don't know the exact distance that we can gain at this point?
I would have to formally design it, but you're looking at a minimum additional 15 feet. So currently we have 15, it would jump to 30. 50 is the requirement.
And does the applicant agree that as a condition of approval that we would agree to explore that, slide it to the north if that's, to the south, excuse me, if that's the board's preference, and demonstrate to the board's professionals the extent to which we can slide it.
Yes.
The next variance is a buffer along streets. Again, 50 feet is required along a minor arterial frontage, which this road constitutes, and we're at the same setback. So are the reasons for that variance, both the need for it and the justification for it, the same as the front yard setback variance?
It's the same. If we were to take this site plan layout and push it to the east, it would just reduce our buffer to that residential zone.
The ordinance requires a buffer between different land uses.
Yes.
Again, 50 feet. We have a residential use to the north, the 3 houses that you've mentioned. And to the east, we have a basin, which could be for commercial, but it's not. It's for residential. So technically we're treating that as residential.
Yes.
Correct? What are the dimensions are the dimensions for that buffer the same as you've already outlined for the parking in the buffer area?
It is the same 50-foot buffer, so the same justification and reasons why we laid this site out the way that we did are the same for that variance.
And the same proposed buffer width for that variance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Parking, the ordinance requires 128 spaces because the ordinance requires 1 parking space for every 150 square feet of floor area. We have 75 parking spaces. Why do we request that variance?
Certainly, and again, my traffic engineer will provide, we'll say, the more technical data behind it, but the reason we laid this out, we do other Tractor Supply developments throughout the state. Waretown, New Jersey just opened up last week. Tinton Falls is...
Waretown?
Waretown, it's on Route 9 in Ocean County. A second one is in Tinton Falls, Monmouth County. There are various other ones throughout the state, but those are the 2 most recent that have opened in my practice. And those had between 73 and 76 parking spaces. We know that Tractor Supply sweet spot for parking is 75 parking spaces. Again, you'll hear more about parking and ITE requirements from my traffic engineer, but the reason we designed for 75 is because that's what our tenant is looking for.
And from a planning perspective, are there benefits to not building parking that we don't need?
In my professional opinion, yes. Your ordinance is, I believe it's, my apologies, up in a variance for an additional 50-something parking spaces. That additional pavement just requires more stormwater management. It's more impervious coverage. It looks like more of an open sea of pavement. It's, in my professional planning opinion, that it is a better planning alternative to provide the actual amount of parking required. If everyone can remember some of the old Kmart facilities, and they look at them today, forgetting that they're a closing business, it looks like a sea of parking out there because retail has changed. 20,000 square feet doesn't necessarily need 200 parking spaces.
Signage. Now, the memo says that we need a variance for the height of the sign, 18 feet permitted, 20 feet proposed, and the size of the freestanding sign, which is 40 square feet permitted and 76.25 square feet proposed. My understanding is we've had some further discussions. Can you bring everyone up to date on what we propose as far as signage, both freestanding and facade?
Certainly. So we'll start with the facade sign. That facade currently is on, it's facing the, and we...
That's Exhibit A3.
Yes, that's what I'm just going to pull up. Exhibit A3 is the architectural elevations, which I will be addressing shortly, but for signage purposes, the top elevation 1, this is your eastern elevation, that is where our sign is located, facing the parking lot.
And one of the questions in the review letter was, the ordinance limits the size of that sign to 15%, I believe, of the facade area. Mr. Kettler may be providing this testimony, so if it's not you, just tell me, but
I'm
do we
ready.
comply with that?
We do. So your ordinance allows 15% of the front facade wall sign, which equates to approximately 375 square feet. Our sign that we're proposing that you see on the board in front of you is 125 square feet. So significantly reduced from what the actual allowed signage area is.
So does the ordinance here allow a facade sign on the front of this building of 375 square feet?
Yes, it does.
And we're roughly 1/3 of that?
Correct.
What about the freestanding sign?
The freestanding sign that we currently have proposed is 76 square feet and 20 feet in the air. Now, we're more than happy already to reduce that 20-foot pylon sign down to an 18-foot, removing the variance from the overall application. And the second item would be to keep the 76 square feet at the 18 feet for better visibility purposes along Route 527.
What are the justifications for that variance, for that increased sign size?
Certainly. So one, from an overall planning standpoint, the overall signage package of the site is allowed pretty significant building-mounted sign. And I think in better character with the neighborhood and the roadway, it would be better to have a more balanced total square footage of the site. We do need that a little bit larger, 76 square foot pylon sign. But like you mentioned earlier, we're a third of what the building mounted sign is. From a planning standpoint, I think the sign package was well done for the property. And second, the slightly larger pylon sign will provide better visibility for people traveling along Route 527 to adequately identify the sign, slow down as they approach the site, and maneuver into the driveway.
And if you're heading north on Old Bridge Englishtown Road, and this building sits sideways essentially, you wouldn't be able to see the facade sign that's currently proposed.
That is correct.
The next variance that we require, potentially anyway, relates to fencing. What do we propose, first of all, in terms of fencing?
We propose an 8-foot chain link fence around the outdoor display area, which is actually depicted on Exhibit A2. So if the board can follow my finger, it comes from the front of the northeast corner of the building, follows eastbound, and circulates around the entire outdoor display area. That fence, again, is 8 feet tall, and it's chain link, so it's open. I believe one of the comments in the professional's memo was there might be a discrepancy actually within the code about if it should be 6 feet, maximum of 10, and vice versa, it should be open, or if it should be closed. So I believe technically we will need a variance associated with the fence. We're looking again for 8 feet, open chain link fence. I believe that would eliminate that first variance identified as fence type. However, the fence screening, we will need a variance for.
So the ordinance, on the one hand, requires an open fence not to exceed 10 feet, and we meet that, correct?
That is correct.
However, the ordinance also requires screening of an outdoor display area with a fence no higher than 6 feet and solid, and we don't meet that
That is correct.
because it's 8 feet and it's not solid.
Correct.
But you can't meet them both, correct?
You cannot.
Okay. And, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a picture of the clad chain link fence, if anyone would like to see it. It's a black clad chain link fence. I can pass that out if anyone has any interest in that. What is the purpose of having the 8-foot-high open fence as opposed to a 6-foot-high solid fence?
Purely security reasons.
And so that customers can see the product as well?
That will be for the open aspect of the fence, yes.
Now, we also require several design waivers which are detailed on page, before we get to the waivers, I'm sorry. In your opinion as a professional planner, first of all, have you reviewed Mr. Taylor's traffic report?
Yes,
And you're familiar with its conclusions and its findings?
I am.
And do you have an opinion as to whether the variances that you just discussed can be granted without substantially impairing the purpose and intent of the zone plan and zoning ordinance?
I do.
What is that opinion?
My opinion is that although we do have maybe 5 or 6 variances after the items that we just conditioned on, and potentially what the fence variance may end up being or not, is that the overall layout was designed accordingly to provide a better planning alternative where, say, for example, just briefly on the front yard setback, we could meet that 50-foot requirement, but then we'd be reducing the buffer to our residents, and I don't think that's a good planning. So overall, with the variances that we have, I do believe the plan that's depicted on this site plan exhibit is a better planning alternative, and as we conditioned a little bit earlier, happy to increase that buffer to the northern side property line where the 3 residents are, will further enhance the planning of this application.
So is it safe to say that these variances, taken individually or in the aggregate, won't substantially impair the intent of the ordinance?
That's correct.
How about the other negative criteria prong, which is, do the variances to create substantial detriment to the public good?
I don't believe so.
Do they change the nature and character of the neighborhood or provide any material adverse effect on the neighbors?
I don't believe so. It's a permitted use within the zone. We did try to accommodate as much as we could due to the unique shape of the property, environmental conditions, and providing the buffering and significant landscaping, which will further enhance. So I do believe that we are not negatively impacting our surrounding neighbors, and we actually thought of them very much so throughout the overall design process.
And to the east, we have woods. Excuse me, to the south, we have woods.
Yep,
To the east, we have a basin.
correct.
and about 300 feet between us and the closest house to the east.
To the east, correct?
And to the north, we have 3 homes, but we have a significant buffer that we are going to plant.
Correct. And again, just to note, we particularly put the building on the south side of the overall upland development to keep that building and the building height away from the backyards of these people. They don't want to be looking at the back of a 20-foot building within 50 feet. It's 180 feet behind it.
I'd like to quickly go through the design waivers that are detailed on page 11 of the professional's July 2nd review letter. The first one is driveway width. The ordinance allows a maximum driveway width of 30 feet. My understanding is in one location, we have a driveway width of 36 feet. Where is that and why?
That driveway width is actually on the main driveway coming off of Old Bridge Englishtown Road. At first, we were looking at it for that width for the truck circulation plan, but we were able to rerun it earlier when we got this review letter, and we can eliminate that design waiver. So we will comply with the 30-foot requirement.
So that's not applicable.
Correct.
The next one relates to sidewalks. Where, are we willing to add sidewalks, and if so, where?
The applicant is willing to provide sidewalks along the frontage of the property up to the upland development, and I'll explain why. Along Old Bridge Englishtown Road, right beyond this flood hazard line, which is depicted in black, is significant environmental constraints. There's a wetlands ditch that follows the roadway. There's a floodway that comes up to about here, which is on the plan, and then a 100-year floodplain. Providing a sidewalk would require significant DP permitting, flood storage, off-site basin requirements, so that the applicant is happy to provide the sidewalk along the frontage where we are improving the site.
Essentially up to that flood hazard area line?
Yes, and I believe that was one of the recommendations in your professional's letter to do that, and the applicant's happy to do so.
Okay. The next waiver relates to screening of mechanical equipment. Are you prepared to address that?
I am, happily. So referring to A3, which is the architectural elevation exhibit, currently what you see here is our 4 elevation sides, and you see some HVAC units on top of the building. One of the comments a couple times throughout the memo was asking for screening. Things that we've done in the past on Tractor Supply, which I think will enhance the architecture as well as provide screening, is what we call a side parapet. So as you can see, this is the front of our building, the tower feature and the higher front building line. As you go to the side features, the roof line slopes down. That's for drainage purposes. But you can potentially see some of the tops of the HVAC units if you were far enough away from the building. We would be willing to install what's called a screening parapet. So it would add another few feet higher, and it would go 1/3 of the way along the side of the building, drop down a foot, go another second third of the property, drop down another foot. This way it would provide screening of all the HVAC units on top, and it wouldn't just look like that kind of fencing that you see sometimes. It would actually be a nice architectural feature of a step-down parapet along the east and west side elevation.
The next waiver relates to light fixture mounting height. Can you address that? Also, foot candles. We'll address both lighting waivers at the same time.
Certainly. So when we do lighting designs, the higher the light fixture is, the more uniform the foot candles are throughout the property. The lower the light fixture is, the brighter it is on the property, and the less uniform it is. So you have hot spots underneath those different lights. I believe the plan that we have now is adequate for the overall site. The lights are actually not located next to the residential. Bringing back up, Damien, A2, the site plan exhibit.
Okay.
2 closest area light poles to the 3 residential property lines are this quad, which has 4 lights on the area light pole. The second is the 3, which is well more than 60 to 75 feet from the property line. If you take a look at our lighting plan, the civil drawing set, it shows no problem.
75 feet and the property line
To the area light pole.
Let's make sure, just briefly repeat that last bit about the location of the poles.
Certainly. So we designed the site to make sure that the area light poles were furthest away from the residential properties while still providing adequate illumination throughout the parking area, which we want illuminated during the darker hours. Those 2 area light poles are set, although at 25 feet, to minimize the illumination as you get closer to the property line. As it's shown on our lighting plan, there is a 0 spillover of light onto the resident's property, 0. The next 2 lights that are on the eastern side, which illuminate these 9 parking spaces, are closer to a residential property line, although that is where the stormwater basin is. One of the comments from the email, the memo, was requesting a shield on those 2 light poles. More than happy to do so. This is an LED light. It is downward facing. One of the comments was just to triple check, add a shield. It'll be on all 3 sides, and make sure the light is forward throwing and you won't have any spillover behind the light. Lastly, the additional lights are one on the back loading area where our truck will be in the trash enclosure, and there is another one that is located within the outdoor display area to illuminate that area. So although it's 25 feet where your ordinance says 18, these higher area light poles are much further away from the residential.
And we require a waiver for the lowest foot candle value. I don't want to get too technical, but why do we require that waiver?
It's difficult to meet an average when you have some brighter spots underneath a area light pole, and in the areas where we don't have a light is a 0. So to meet the average is a little difficult. We'll work with the professionals to get as close as we can, but from a testimony standpoint, I believe that this lighting plan adequately lights the area that will be utilized, the parking for the customers. One of the another comments that are in the letter asking to actually intensify the light at the driveway intersection, more than happy to do so with that. So the area that may not be utilized by the parking customers is not as illuminated. The areas that do have the front parking area are more well illuminated, so our average is thrown off.
Next, the ordinance requires a 5-foot minimum curb radius, and we propose less than that in the landscape islands. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's just in the landscape islands?
Correct, and what we'll do is we'll tweak some of those curbs, try to open them up to 5, but I believe we'll have a couple that are maybe 2 and 3. Very typical within a commercial parking lot to have a smaller curb radius. You won't have a larger 15-foot radius or a 5 that you would see more on a driveway.
And then the final waiver that we seek relates to, or at least that's listed in the letter, is the landscape islands required to break up parking rows of more than 20 parking spaces. Are we willing to comply with that?
Yes, as I testified to a little earlier, we will provide 1 landscape island in the middle of the 24 space, so knocking that down to 23, and we'll add 1 landscape island with the shade tree in there.
There was a question in the review letter as to the location and size and aisle width of the loading area. Have you addressed that? If not, please do.
Certainly. So your ordinance, and I believe the board engineer was simply just asking for clarification. Depending on the size of the building and the orientation of the loading space, they want to see a minimum length and minimum width. For example, we're looking for a 10 by 60 foot loading space. We have about a 75 by 25 foot area in front of the steel loading dock ramp to provide for our tractor trailer, and our last sheet of our overall civil drawing set shows that tractor trailer circulating the site, backing onto that steel ramp, and how it fits within that area. So I'll provide a dimension on our resubmittal showing that we meet those loading space requirements.
Okay. They also asked whether we'll add crosswalks within the site to improve pedestrian safety. Are we willing to do that?
Yes.
There was another question relating to a propane, an above-ground tank, and my understanding is that that's shown on the plan in the outdoor storage area to the east of the building,
Correct.
and that's a propane tank?
Propane filling tank, yes.
Propane filling tank. And where will that be located?
Right now, it's currently depicted on the eastern side of the drive aisle that goes through the outdoor display area. The applicant's willing to, and it meets the board is seeking, and it meets building code requirements. The applicant is willing to relocate that propane filling to the western side of the access aisle.
And that would be less than 200 feet from the east property line, correct?
Correct.
But not less than 200 feet from the north property line, where the 3 residents are.
Correct.
To the east, however, the actual distance between that tank and the closest house is, again,
Well over 200 feet.
well over 200 feet.
Correct.
To the extent that that requires relief, we seek that relief, do we not?
We do.
Okay. Lastly, last question I think I have is, can you give us a brief overview of the status of our outside agency approvals?
Certainly. So the first one we submitted was called an NJDEP, Flood Hazard Area Verification. This determines the location of the floodplain, the floodway, as well as the riparian buffer. We have been approved, and they are identified correctly on the plans that you see before you. The next permit is an NJDEP Wetlands Letter of Interpretation, as well as a General Permit 7 and General Permit 6. They are pending. DEP's been on site multiple times. We expect a permit within the next 30 days. All those areas are identified accurately within the civil drawings that you have before you. Next is Middlesex County Planning Board. We're still working with them, so a final permit is pending. But they have not commented negatively on the location of the driveway. They've asked for a review of some improvements along the road. The Water and Sewer from Old Bridge MUA have provided review letters on more technical specifications associated with the water lines and sewer lines. We will be resubmitting back to them and willing to look for that, but those are still technically pending. We still have tentative and final approvals to go through with Water and Sewer of Old Bridge.
That's all the questions I have for Mr. Seawald, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mrs. Swan, do you have any comments?
I have a couple of questions, actually. First, the setback. In my memo, I had mentioned that if you push back the building, you could eliminate that variance, and I believe you justified that if you push back the building, then you reduce the buffer on the rear side, right, the east side. But what if you shrink the outdoor display area without really altering the buffer? In that case, you would be able to eliminate the front yard setback variance, correct?
So the outdoor display area is kind of a set size based on how all TSCs operate. I do agree with you from a layout standpoint that if we were to shift it up the 5.4 feet and hold the edge of the access aisle line, we could essentially reduce the outdoor storage area, but unfortunately, it's a requirement for them to have a minimum 15,300 square feet.
Because there was one more comment, I think the engineering department as well as I made, that the corner of the building, like suppose if you push back the building by a couple of feet and you have some sort of landscape buffer or you have some bollards, then you can prevent any cars from ramming into that corner because you have your loading area, you have cars turning around, going around the building, correct?
So, great question. Our cars, the majority of them will be directed to circulate through the parking lot, come down the access aisle, and then circulate through the outdoor storage area. And we could do so with additional signage if we're looking for. We did the similar down in Waretown, New Jersey. The only real three trucks that you'll see back here will be our tractor trailer, our daily box truck delivery, and the refuse truck that goes back there. So I agree with you. We can add some bollards for the building protection. Majority of the site plans that I've done for Tractor Supply does have the access aisle against the building. If we were to slide this back and add, say, a 3 to 5 foot landscape island, we can certainly do so, just knowing that it would shrink this buffer to the basin. Again, I believe that it's a stormwater basin. It's not going to change. There's not a house back there. I would have no problem doing so, just knowing that this 21-foot dimension would shrink a little bit.
Right. Can you talk more about the permanent trailer equipment display area that is to the northerly boundary?
Certainly. It's about 3,000 square feet total. It runs the entire length of the 24 parking spaces that are along the northern side. That is where we just park trailers that are for sale.
Did you consider
I'm sorry.
Did you consider moving it elsewhere? Because that's right next to the residences.
Yes, we certainly looked at other areas. The location along Old Bridge, which would actually be Tractor Supply's preferred spot, we believe would then disturb that 50-foot buffer requirement that Old Bridge ordinance is looking for. So that would have been the first spot, and I didn't think, and after discussions, that would be the best spot for the town. So we moved it over here. Because the trailers, there's not a lot of activity. If they sell a few a week, someone comes, ties their car back up to it and leaves. There's no movement along there.
But that's not a great location either, because you are placing trailers right next to the residences, very close to the property line. It's like hardly 15 feet away from the property line.
And great comment. As I testified to a little bit earlier, we're more than happy to shift the entire site plan over. I don't know if I'll meet the full 50-foot requirement. That 15, though, will grow to at least 30, most likely closer to 40-foot buffer, which I believe is a significant buffer because the trailer really doesn't provide any activity.
Since you're talking about that buffer,
Yes.
I noticed that in your landscape plan, because it's all interrelated, I feel, the shrubbery that's proposed along the trailer equipment area, I think it's dwarf inkberry, and your schedule says it's 24 inches to 30 inches. So one, it's not going to provide that much buffer. Two, it's around the trailer parking area. The trailers have some amount of height, like 10 feet. You have 2 feet shrubbery to screen the whole area from vehicles, noise, all sorts of activities in that parking area.
So if I can, just want to get, to address your question, get a little bit more information. First of all, what kind of trailers are we talking about?
And again, we do have an operator here that will go through all this very specific, but I don't want you to think of enormous trailers on the back of a tractor trailer. These will be more personal trailers that you would tie up to a sedan. So lower lying, they will not be 10 feet in the air, more like 3 to 4 feet off the ground.
And what are we proposing to screen those from the residents in terms of plant material, to answer the planner's question?
We have two types of plants, a shrub and then an evergreen tree behind it. One of your comments in the letter was to replace, I forgot off the top of my head as well, what shrub we're looking for. They were looking for a shrub that maybe grows to 4 to 5 feet. We have no problem replacing those shrubs with a larger growing shrub. But behind that shrub as well is a long row of evergreen trees. And the reason we do evergreen is so that during the winter months, deciduous trees lose their leaves. You will have an evergreen buffer throughout the year. So to summarize and answer your question, we are willing to replace the shrubs that are currently on the plan with a higher growing shrub to maybe 4 or 5 feet. I believe that was in there. There are evergreen trees that are there that grow to much taller heights, obviously, which will block any visibility between the residential and the commercial development. And with the sliding shift of the overall layout, we're going to increase that buffer from 15 to 30 to 40 feet. So it won't meet the full intent of the ordinance of the 50s, so we still need a variance for it, but it's a major shift. We can't go too much further because of the flood hazard area and the stormwater facilities.
So going back again to about the trailers. So I looked at a couple of sites, tractor supply companies, and I really didn't see a trailer equipment area anywhere around. I did see the outdoor display area, but I couldn't really locate a trailer equipment display area. So could you just elaborate on that?
Certainly, and that was one of the comments in the memo. Immediately when I reviewed it, I spoke with Tractor Supply Corporate. We pulled the lease exhibits from those couple sites that were in the memo. They are not located in the same spot as we currently have on there, but every Tractor Supply company has trailers displayed on site. There's 3 areas that they have on every one of their buildings. An outdoor display area, which is this fenced 15,000 and change square foot to the right of the building. They have a sidewalk display, which is in the front of their building, and they always have a trailer display. It's one of their main proponents of their sales.
Is it always separate or kept away from the outdoor display area, or is it like in and around that area?
They're always relocated depending on what each town is looking for. Again, Tractor Supply would prefer it to be along Old Bridge Englishtown Road. I don't believe that Old Bridge would prefer that. They would like a bigger buffer between the road curb line and the parking lot. That's why we decided to put it over here. And again, it won't be as impactful to the residential because we are increasing that buffer from 15 to 30 feet. We cannot put the trailers to the east because then they will not be seen. And then we don't want to put them to the south because that's not where our customers will be. So we tried to find the best location that will not be impactful to the surrounding area. If the board is okay, I'd be more than happy to relocate it by the access aisle along the frontage, but I don't believe that the Old Bridge would appreciate that.
Parking. One thing I noticed is when I was looking at other Tractor Supply Company stores, most of these stores are located within a non-resident, a commercial strip, or with a bunch of other uses. So
Within a shopping center.
yes, and which means that they do have shared parking arrangements. If there is shared parking arrangement, maybe 75 parking stalls might suffice their demand. But in a location like this, when it's just a single store, do you believe that the 75 parking stalls are enough?
I do. So some of those shared locations actually have less than 75 parking spaces. When they have ground-up development projects, they are looking for 75 parking spaces. As I testified to earlier, the Waretown location, the Tinton Falls locations, the ones that I've personally done, had 75 spaces. There are other stores that are ground-up pads, similar to the one you see here, that are also much closer to 75, if not plus or minus around there.
And we'll provide additional testimony on the parking from our other witnesses as well.
All right. My favorite topic, signage.
Signage.
Yes. Like I said in my memo, I strongly feel that use like that doesn't really need a pylon sign. To me, a pylon sign is usually when it's a shopping center along a very, very busy highway, or it's a gas station. I don't really feel the need to have a pylon sign here, especially when the building is less than 50 feet from the street right of way. I could understand if the building was set back really, really further away from the entrance and visibility is an issue. But here, you are so close to the right of way that you really don't need a pylon sign. And like I said in my memo, what you can do is, instead of asking for a variance on the pylon sign, you could add another wall sign on the facade facing English Town Road, and you could seek a variance for that. But at the same time, eliminate the pylon sign and put a monument sign instead. A monument sign in combination with a wall sign on the front facade should be good enough to for people who traverse along English Town Road to see the store.
And I really appreciate the alternative. Sometimes when we talk about signage, it's just take it all away. So I think it's a very fair opportunity. We could certainly discuss that with our applicant. I think a second sign along the roadway is certainly beneficial. You are correct, it would require a variance, but in planning, I do agree with you on all your points that you made.
I think that's it. That's it. Thank you.
Nicole, did you have one?
So I think you mentioned on page 12 of 15 of our memo that the drainage section, the stormwater management, which starts with number 3, and has quite a few comments that you were going to address all of them. Now, with the exception of what you had commented on,
The fence?
anything that you've commented and gotten on the record, everything else then in the memo you would then address. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to go through them individually unless you want to. But
No, everything that we couldn't address or the reasons we didn't, I believe I provided testimony to. Everything else we are willing to comply with.
Okay, I just wanted to get an idea of when the loading occurs. You know, when do you unload and load? When does the deliveries occur? Are they within the windows of when the store is opened? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the deliveries only come when the store is open, because that's when our employees are there to take the forklift or the dolly, come out of the loading door that's on the rear side of the building, go up the steel ramp, unload from that tractor trailer once or twice a week, totally during store hours. Same thing with those daily smaller box truck deliveries. They come during store hours and are parked behind the building.
Okay, so then I think with the bus route, I would just have to check with the bus route to see like when the times are, to see, you know, if that's agreeable. I mean, on the off chance that there's somebody in there, I would just want to get a feel on the bus company and what their thoughts are. Otherwise, just to reiterate what Vina had said on the front buffer, I mean, I think, you know, reducing the display area to try and achieve that instead of shifting or rotating to have that corner out of it, seems like an amenable thing to do. Also, the residential buffer along the northern property line, 14.8 feet versus 50, and I know you're going to do the shifting of the 30, but in my mind, if there's a display area there, it should be 50. there, you're up against three residential properties. So you want to buffer that, from that commercial, so I don't see how deviating from the 50. So I look forward to working with you to get that increased buffer. But if that buffer is less than 50, I would say relocate your display area to the outdoor display area, to the tractor display, to the outdoor display area. I mean, to me, the Tractor Supply Company is sort of like, very specific. People aren't coming there because they see the trailer off the side of the road. They're coming there because they know you have it, So I don't think it needs to be so visible.
Couple things on that. If we shift the building to be 50 feet from the road, it will not only reduce the buffer to the east, but because that rear property line is on an angle, it will also slightly reduce the buffer to the north by the three residents. Not significantly, but
I'm not asking you to shift the building and everything else. I'm asking you to shift the building, or what we're asking is to shift the building and reduce your outdoor display area, not to angle it or shift it.
Understood. I wasn't sure, though, even if we reduced the outdoor display area, whether it would still reduce the size or width of the buffer to the north. Maybe it wouldn't, I'm not sure. Our thought on the buffer to the north is that with the shifting of the site or the developed area to the south, and adding landscaping as necessary in coordination with the two of you, that would provide a significant buffer to the three houses. Again, this is a commercial zone. We know we're joining residential zones. You seek to protect the residential zones. We understand and respect that. We thought that with the increase, even if we don't get to 50 feet, we could offset that by adding landscaping and get to where the ordinance intends. You may feel differently, but that was our thought there.
And Mr. Bureau and the board, after speaking with the applicant, so our outdoor display area is actually the narrowest that can go for Tractor Supply operations. The products that they provide within those outdoor display areas, again, which is this concrete hatched area, need minimal spacing for the pallets. So I can't shrink that area, but I'll tell you what we can do. We can condition right now that we can meet the 50-foot buffer for the residents to the north, providing, so that means we're going to keep the trailer display where it is, but we will provide that 50-foot buffer. We'll have to work with the rear access out because we will be very close to the flood hazard area, but I'll make that work with your office from an engineering standpoint. So I believe with the 50-foot buffer, the issue of the trailer display hopefully goes away. We'll provide the adequate landscaping that's there. But I do need to make everyone aware that 90-foot dimension for the outdoor display is at the minimum right now. They're actually wider in other stores.
But we can comply and will comply with the 50-foot buffer requirement on the north property line.
Correct.
And that buffer will be measured from the north property line to what point?
To the edge of the trailer display and any other disturbance. Correct.
So it's 50 feet,
And then.
then the display.
Correct. And on one other item, which, whatever the board preference is, we do again have that variance to the front property line of the 44.8 feet. Since we're moving everything back, that could get a little worse. So I want to make everyone aware that as I shift this 35 feet, the property lines along Old Bridge and the eastern side property line starts to narrow. So if, say, you want the 44 feet to be held, that's fine. This area might get a little bit smaller. Now we have 21 feet from the edge of the pavement to that edge of the residential property line where our stormwater basin is. That may reduce down to 18 or 17 feet. I still believe that it will look the same on paper and within the character of the neighborhood. I just want the board and the professionals to realize that with that 50 feet and the sliding of the site plan over, that area along where the basin is, which I think is the lowest planning value, might not have as much buffer.
Can we talk about the lighting again?
Absolutely.
So now that we're like 50 feet away from the residential property, I mean, from my standpoint, and I've done commuter lots for the town, when you have one, I prefer to have, one foundation, one pole, 25 feet up, 4 fixtures on there, because then I only have to construct one foundation, and then I have spillage for the 4 luminaires on top. If you bring it down, then you need more of those foundations, more of the light poles, etc. I rather bring it down, you know, that we're, now that we're further away from the residents on the side, if you bring it out to 18 feet, and maybe if you need a pole at that 50-foot mark in that parking lot, I think it's better to bring that envelope down than to have it centrally located in the center just to achieve the 25.
And we have no problem with that. That other design waiver about the average, it may get more exacerbated. We'll continue to work with the lighting company to rerun it, maybe tweak the lumens that are on each level head. We'll try to comply as much as possible, but for tonight's purposes, we can comply with the 18 feet. I think we should still seek the design waiver for that average illumination requirement, just because I can't promise that I can meet that.
I did request the sidewalk along County Route 527 up until the flood hazard area, because I'm not looking to make it a huge strain. I do defer to the county and whatever they request from you, because it is within the county right away.
Totally fair.
So, whatever is agreed upon, I then do defer to them. I'm going to wait for the traffic engineer.
Sounds good.
Can I just make one clarification? As we slide the building to get to 50 feet, what approximately would be the distance to the front to Old Bridge English Town Road, so that I have a number that might go in a resolution? You're going to have to estimate and
I can estimate.
overestimate, and then overestimate a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Can you give me 2 seconds?
yeah, or before the end of the evening.
Are you done, or are you, yes? Do you have another question?
Yes.
Calculating.
Okay, then the board needs time to ask questions.
Right.
Approximately 40. Approximately 41.
41 feet.
And again, just to condition as the night goes on, if that 41 is not acceptable to the board, we can increase it back to the 45. But again, that open space area to the east would then get shrunk, which I would be fine with, honestly.
Okay, did you have something else?
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about the propane tank?
What about it?
So I'm not sure if you need a variance on that one. So can you just explain again? It's above ground?
Yes. It is above ground, surrounded by bollards, will meet all building code requirements. It's meant to refill propane tanks.
And it will be more than, I think your ordinance may require a 200-foot setback for that tank, if I'm not mistaken, and I may be mistaken. We meet it to the north, south, and west. We're less than 200 feet to the east, but there's a basin at that point. So we think we meet the intent of the ordinance, but to the extent we don't meet the letter of the ordinance, we seek relief for that.
So at this point, it's an accessory structure, correct? Accessory structure?
I don't know if it satisfies the definition of a structure under the ordinance or not. It's an above-ground propane tank, similar to what you would see at all Tractor Supplies and other stores like that. I'm not sure. Nor am I sure whether that changes the variance analysis, but it may be.
And I just wanted to clarify, Tractor Supply will not be doing commercial propane tank sales where a small truck comes on and refills. This is purely for a customer to come with any tank they may have, whether it's for a compressor for a tool or barbecue propane tank.
Okay. And will you testify about regarding the architecture too? The architecture of the building?
Yes.
Okay. One of my comments was that the facade that faces English Town Road, is there a way you could add some sort of architectural features, faux windows, awnings, something to make it more attractive? Because I understand the front facade faces the parking lot, but when you are traversing on English Town Road, all you see is a blank wall. And there are residential developments in and around. I know there is a project that got approval a couple of years back, but it's again a residential project to the north of this property. But, I mean, this is our neighborhood commercial zone. We want to make the area more lively, or we want to have some sort of interaction, visual interaction with the building. Right now, what you see is a blank wall. It's something like a storage building would be. So is there anything you could do to make it aesthetically more pleasing, appealing?
I do storage buildings. Those are really ugly. Those are the sheet metal walls. So we will have brick along the entire facade. There will be this red band that comes across. These darker tan columns that you see here are not just painted, but they do have a 4 to 6 inch bump out to provide some kind of depth perception and break up that long horizontal line. Again, what I testified to earlier for the screening, instead of having that fence screening, we're looking to do the construction step-down parapet, which will add another architectural feature for having a parapet wall. I believe the canopy cannot be constructed in awnings because of our truck circulation around, and that's why they don't do it on the other 3 sides. If it's absolutely required, we can work with the architect to do sets of 3 faux windows in between each one of the columns, if that would be acceptable to the board and to your office.
Thank you.
No problem.
Anything else from our professionals? Okay, we'll have board comments. First of all, I may be the only one, but what is a Tractor Supply? I mean, what kind of you have these little things that attach to a car?
Yeah, so Mr. Kettler is my next witness. He'll give you as much or as little as you want about Tractor Supply, but Tractor Supply is a store that's usually in a somewhat rural area, provides products to homeowners like us or the casual farmer types, and it's much smaller than a big box Home Depot or Lowe's, but it provides some of the same products with some differences that Mr. Kettler can tell you about.
It's a niche store, like Damian said. It provides for the lawn, like residential, but also provides some farming items, the trailers and some ride-on mowers in the outdoor display area. It's a lot more niche. They also have some sporting goods and equipment that are in there as well.
Okay, and then on this border where you say you're having your storm drainage, are those developable lots on that area, the R20?
Can you just reference for me where you're looking at?
Yeah, up.
Here?
No,
Or,
yeah,
talking about within here?
right. Or is that all storm?
This is a retention pond for this
Okay.
subdivision.
Okay, so the nearest house on that area would be that are already developed there?
All the houses are currently developed, and our property line to the backyard of the closest house is 300 feet.
Okay, but that's all like storm drainage?
That is a wet pond,
There's no
correct?
building?
Very large pond there.
All right, does anyone from the board have any questions or comments?
I have several questions.
Yes, Mr. Lucy?
The first question I wanted to ask was actually directed towards the professionals. I wanted to know if the display area of the trailers along Old Bridge Englishtown Road, if that was strictly for aesthetic reasons or just due to concerns about shrinking the setback even further? Why is that not an option in terms of the trailer display?
Primarily for setback reasons, because the code requires, the ordinance requires a 50-foot buffer along residential uses. So if a non-residential use abuts a residential property, then you need to have a 50-foot buffer. And this trailer equipment area is, I believe, right now 15 feet from the property line. So it's very close to the property, so that was my concern.
But they've agreed to move it to 50 feet, right?
Mr. Luca, I think you were questioning why it can't be on 527,
Right.
along 527,
Oh,
because
oh.
that's within the front yard setback.
Okay, thank you.
And along 516 too, you have the buffer requirement.
It also was confusing too, because I was referring to front on what is actually the side of the building, just referring to what was facing the road. Thank you. My other questions were related. I wanted to know about the outdoor area. Is that a 3-season display area? Is it meant to be 4-season? I just want to know in terms of, is it plowed in the summer, in the winter time?
Mr. Kettler can answer
Mr.
that.
Kettler?
Once
Okay.
he's sworn, sure.
One of the things I was curious about was in terms of the northern side. I had seen one of the notes in the memo was related to planting of things in the buffer area may interfere with drainage from the backyards. Could you address that?
Certainly can, and it was a great comment. The property, as you can imagine, slopes gradually from the northern side all the way down to where our stream is. So one of the comments from, I believe, your township engineer was saying that if the residential lots are slightly higher than our parking lot and our building, and we were to put this 50-foot buffer of evergreen trees and plantings, could we be creating a drainage problem by blocking the natural overland flow of stormwater from those residential properties through our property? I will ensure that when we push this out and you have the 50 feet, there are either a few different ways you can handle drainage. You can grade it so that there's still the natural overland flow from these residential lots onto our property. You could set the evergreens and the buffers. This buffer is not going to be, say, on a 10-foot tall berm, so it won't block the stormwater. Now, I believe probably the concern was more tied to when you install a tree, there's a ball associated with it, but there are some pathways in between each one of them. We'll ensure with various notes and grading techniques that drainage will still be able to go through that buffer area.
The next question I had was in terms, I know that you had mentioned all of the various applications that you had and that were pending. I didn't hear anything about the Freehold Soil Conservation District.
Very good. That application is pending as well.
Okay. My other question actually is related to, I noticed based on the elevation plans that you had given, it seems as though the overall building itself is sloping towards the drainage area and there's downspouts back there. So is the intent to have runoff from the roof funnel towards the stormwater retention?
That's a great question. All of our roof leaders are routed underground and are connected to our stormwater facility. So it will not flow overland onto the pavement. That creates freezing issues during the wintertime. So all of the roof runoff from the building will be collected through a roof leader conveyance system. We'll design it in accordance with your board engineer and will be tied to the underground and above ground systems.
My remaining questions are just in terms of that outdoor display, which can hold off.
Mr.
Thank
Kettler knows a lot about Tractor Supply.
Okay, are you finished?
Yes,
All right,
thank you.
Mr. Lauer.
Mr. Seawald, is this a typical layout for the Tractor Supply, having the front of the building to look away from the main road? Or is this a result of the size of the lot and the dimensions of the lot?
The answer is yes to both of the questions. So there are some Tractor Supplies that are laid out like this. Some, though, you may see with the building in the back and the parking up front. Due to the nature of the way that the lot is laid out, this, we believe, was the best layout.
Okay, my other question, in the buffer area between the northerly side of the property, you would rely strictly on plantings to buffer the people from traffic headlights shining on their houses. Are you have any intention to put a fence in that area? Did you consider putting a fence to block headlights?
I did consider it. I believe, if you can pull up the survey, I believe that the residents already have fences.
Yeah, it shows, it looks like there's fences, but they could be chain link fences.
And we can certainly talk to the applicant. The way that the buffer will look, you will not be able to see through it, regardless of the low-lying shrubs and the double staggered. Right now, we just have a single row of evergreen trees right there because it's 15 feet wide. When we go to 50 feet, it'll look like a double staggered row. So the centers of the trees will be offset in a depth perception point so that when you look through it, you won't be able to see the residents, and vice versa, they will not be able to see the parking area of the Tractor Supply.
And also, the survey, which is Exhibit A5, shows an existing vinyl fence on at least 2 of the 3, the 2 end lots. I'm not sure about the middle lot, but it does note vinyl fences on the other 2 lots.
Yes, I see that. It's very small, but I see it.
Right, it is small.
Okay. Did you consider putting the lights for the parking lot on that, now that you're going to have a buffer, a substantial buffer, did you consider putting the lights for the parking lot on that side to reflect in and away from the residents?
So currently, as it's laid out, even with the 15-foot buffer, the residents wouldn't have a spillover of lightage. So I don't believe that now when we have the additional 35 feet, now we're at the 50-foot buffer, that the residents will be impacted by the lights.
Okay, so even though there's no spillover, these lights will not annoy the neighbors, so to
No,
speak?
correct. So it's an LED fixture, which I don't believe I talked about too much. It's not the older style shoebox fixtures that you see. It's downward facing. There's no glare. It complies with dark sky requirements, so there's not illumination above the horizontal plane of the LED light. And it is downward facing and forward throw, meaning that it's not shining up and out. It's shining down to illuminate parking and sidewalk areas.
Okay, and my last question, I think you testified that you're still waiting for DEP approval?
For the wetlands LOI and
Right.
general permits approval.
It looks like you have wetlands approximately where the building's going to be?
Within the parking area, correct.
Yes. They'll be able to do away with that?
Yes, so just to give a little bit more information on that, the LOI is a letter of interpretation. That's what we're required to flag all classified wetlands that are on site. The additional permits, General Permit 6, General Permit 7, allows us to fill and/or disturb those wetlands due to the low ecological classification of the wetlands.
And that property in that area currently drains, it looks like it drains into the county system. Is that going to be eliminated? That looks like a head wall or flared end section?
So there's a flared end section right now that is on Old Bridge Englishtown roads that dumps onto our property. That stormwater actually created that wetlands pocket. So
Oh, it's going into...
So it goes onto our site. You can see the dashed line in the middle of the parking lot. That is going to be filled, and that the flared end section gets removed and connected to the next drainage structure further south on Route 527.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for your questions.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Lenny.
I'm kind of concerned about the height of the sign, the pillar sign. So I know that we'd spoken about that and possibly lowering it down to the ground. You know, are you guys willing to do that?
Yeah, I believe I testified. If I wasn't clear, my apologies. We're willing to meet the 18-foot requirement, and I believe it was a good planning recommendation. I'll have to confirm for my client that if we go to a monument-style sign, that we would request then the wall-mounted sign feasibility along Old Bridge. So if it does come down low, we would like the wall-mounted for a second one.
Okay. If they went to a monument sign, would you be opposed to having a sign on the Englishtown Road side of the building?
No, in fact, that was one of my recommendations, that they should eliminate the pylon sign and choose to have a monument sign, and in return, they could probably ask for a variance on another additional wall sign. And especially when, if they add 4 windows and have some architectural treatment, I think the wall sign will really look nice and attractive.
That's all I got.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Lau.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. Did you state previous that you would be willing to put more shade trees in the area of the parking area?
Yeah, so each landscape island that's within the parking lot will now have a shade tree.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if the board has no other questions, I'm going to open it to the audience. Public, is there anyone from the public that has any questions or comments? Yes? If you'd come up and give your name and address, please.
Sure. James Curcio, C-U-R-C-I-O, and I am that house right there, 2 Mapleton Road. So my wife and I moved here last July. We were looking forward to moving to Old Bridge for the community. right? It was a nice community. And, you know, our goal was to settle down, start a family. Our goal was not to be next to a Tractor Supply store. So I hear a lot of questions on variances and things like that. I don't completely understand them, but what I understand is that I don't want to be next to a company. You had mentioned that these are in rural areas. That does not look like a rural area to me. The one in Waretown is on Route 9. Some other things you said, you're looking to minimize the impact to us. There's a significant impact. So I don't know what the traffic person is going to say, but on Saturday and Sunday from 10 to about 4, Englishtown Road is jam-packed with people revving their engines coming from the auctions and the flea market, and they cut through Mapleton Road. And they rev their engine, they speed, there's kids that live down there. The bus isn't an issue, right? So I'll throw that out there. It's actually on the other side, and it's pretty early and pretty late. But then if I see where you're going to deliver your trucks, that's my backyard. I don't want my kids seeing trucks deliver things. I don't know why you picked this area. This is a community. This is not a retail shop. Some other things you said, the sign is going to point directly into my backyard. Again, I can see directly through. I'm going to see right over your 8-foot trees. So make them 20, right? It doesn't matter. It is such a huge inconvenience. You don't move to an area like this and expect to encounter something like this. 9 p.m. is ridiculous. I mean, maybe that's early for you. It's not for me. A propane tank in my backyard? I mean, you guys are talking about, is it 200 feet? I don't care. I have a propane tank right next to my backyard. I don't want that. You said the variances will not negatively impact the neighbors. That's not true. I'm a neighbor. It's going to impact me. The bushes, while they might shield the light, they will not shield the noise. If you look on the side of my house next to Englishtown Road, I have giant evergreens. We have other large trees. I hear everything. I'm going to hear your deliveries. I'm going to hear people picking up stuff. I'm going to hear people revving their engines. Is this a community or is this a retail shop? Like, pick something. Because if it's a retail shop, I'm going to sell my house, and I'm going to uproot my family, and we're going to move. And I don't want to have to do that. You said the variance will push it into a flood area. Maybe this isn't the area for you. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone else from the public? Okay, we'll close it for now, but we'll be open it out to the other witnesses.
Thank you. Our next witness is Chris Kettler. Thanks, Josh. Dawn, would you put up A2, please? Thank you.
I knew you should know.
Good evening. My name is Chris Kettler. I'm with DMK Development.
Hold on, you have to be
We'll get
sworn.
sworn.
I'm sorry.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And just spell your name.
Slow
Spell your name
down
for
or
the record.
don't speak so close to the mic. Okay. I can do that.
And just spell your last name for the record, please.
Yeah, my name is Chris Kettler. The last name is Kettler.
Mr. Kettler, are you with DMK Development, the applicant?
I am.
And what's your role and responsibility with DMK?
I'm a development manager for DMK Development.
Can you tell us a little bit about who DMK Development is?
Yeah, we primarily are developers for Tractor Supply Company. We do a few other, we're from West Michigan. We've developed about 35 ground-up constructions for Tractor Supply Company and a few things back local to our community, but mostly and primarily just for Tractor Supply. And when I say developer, what that means is we have the land under contract to purchase from the landowner. We'll purchase the land, build the building for Tractor Supply, and they'll become a tenant in the situation, so they will lease back the building from us. So we'll remain the fee owner of the property.
Okay. And how many Tractor Supplies have you personally been involved with?
About 35.
And for how many years?
Let's see. So I started working with my father, who started our business in 2006 when I graduated.
Okay. And can you tell everybody a little bit about who
Yeah,
Tractor
what is
Supply is?
Yeah, definitely. The name is a little bit of a misnomer. The company started in 1938 as a mail order tractor parts supplier. In 1939, they opened their first retail business. The reason I say it's a little bit of a misnomer, that's where the name came from, Tractor Supply Company. They no longer actually supply a whole lot of tractor parts. Just speaking to the different areas under roof, they more cater to the hobby farmer and tradesman. It's kind of a farm, feed store, hardware store type of mix. Speaking to the areas within the store, the front right of the store, and we'll divide them into quadrants. So under roof, the front right is the clothing area, workwear, Carhartt, work boots, Western wear. The front left of the store is seasonal lawn and garden, some chainsaws, like I say, seasonal lawn and garden, you know, your shovels, rakes, and so on. The back left of the store is automotive, compressors. They have some implement tires, truck, pickup truck, toolboxes. The back right of the store is where most of their sales comes from, and that is pet and animal health, both large and small animal. You know, dog food, cat food, but all the way up to equine products, horse feed, animal health. As far as the outdoor area, that is used for products that are too large to display under roof. They have livestock gates, fence posts, bagged goods, and then there's a sidewalk display area in front of the building and in front of the fence yard that's used for chippers, mowers, shredders. Again, back to the name being a little bit of a misnomer. They only supply and carry riding lawnmowers. There's no actual like Kubota type, you know, bigger tractors. They're just, you know, lawnmowers. And those types of things will be in the sidewalk display in front of the store, and then the trailer and equipment display area that there's been a lot of discussion on are 5x8, 6x12 flatbed utility trailers that you might haul, you know, your riding lawnmower if it needed to be serviced. There's no enclosed horse trailers, so nothing that extends very high, as Jess testified to 3 to 4 feet, you know, high, not enclosed, open flatbed utility trailers. So that's a little bit about what they carry.
So those trailers are typically like a black metal open trailer?
Yep, they'll be like a wood bed with, you know, single axle flatbeds.
Now, were you here for Mr. Seawald's testimony?
Yes, I was.
And did he accurately testify as to the store hours, numbers of employees, and deliveries?
Yes, he did.
Also, there was a question about other stores and whether they have tractor equipment display areas, and question whether it's necessary here. Can you address that?
Yeah, all the Tractor Supply Company stores will have a designated area. It's a requirement of all of their landlords to get zoning approvals to allow for this area. In their site plan that they have as a lease exhibit that Josh testified to, there's 3 areas that they demand, that they have their owners and developers, landlords, call out. The fence area is a yellow on the site plan, which is the fenced outdoor area, the 15,300 here. The sidewalk display in front of the building is highlighted in green on the lease exhibit, and then the trailer and equipment display is highlighted in pink on their lease exhibit to each of their leases, and what their developers are required to get approval for in every municipality. And the reason they do that is that site plan gets posted in the back room of their manager's office, so the manager fully understands where they're able to display product.
I'm going to ask you just to slow down a little bit, okay?
My apologies.
Sorry, I can sense the frustration to the left. There was a reference in the review letter to the Township of Washington store and the Mount Olive store. Do they have trailer display areas?
Yes, they do.
Pardon me, yes?
Yes, they do.
Now, I know, at least I believe, Mount Olive is an inline location with pad sites in the front, is that correct? Or do I have that backwards as a Township of Washington?
Give me one sec. Yeah, Mount Olive appears to be in a shopping center where it was an existing building an existing vacancy, second-generation space was leased by Tractor Supply in the end cap of a shopping center.
Is that more typical than a freestanding building like this for Tractor Supply?
They strive for about 50/50, and, you know, if they want to be in a particular market like they do in Old Bridge, if there's not inventory, they will, you know, if there's not inventory where they want to be, they will lease, or they will build a new store. If they can find an existing building, like in the case of Mount Olive, that's what they'll do.
That leads me to the question of parking. We propose 75 parking spaces on this plan, and we need a variance for that. You're aware of that, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Seawald testified that 75 parking spaces is adequate for Tractor Supply based upon their experience in operating their business. Is that correct?
Correct.
Are you satisfied, based on your experience in developing, I think you said 35 of these, that 75 spaces is enough for Tractor Supply?
Yes, I am.
Does Tractor Supply tell you how many spaces that they require?
Yes, they do. They specify in an existing building situation like Mount Olive, if they have, we did a project in Michigan that was 58 dedicated spaces just for them. Now granted, it's a shopping center, there's some shared parking, but in their new builds, anywhere from, I want to say, bear with me a minute while I get the, where I have my figures. Anywhere from 68 to 74 are the new constructions that we've built. That's what we've been able to, or what we've done with those locations as far as number of parking spaces.
That's all the questions I have for Mr. Kettler.
Do the professionals have any questions?
Okay, the propane tank, is that something which every Tractor Supply store has?
Every recent Tractor Supply store, they ask that we get the propane tank approved. You know, they will have their own, I'm not exactly sure what the process is, but their own state approval that they need to go through in order to be able to put that on site. Certainly, it's our job to make sure that it's an allowable and an approved use for the jurisdiction, but there's a next level of permitting before they can place that tank that they will need to go through. So I'm sorry, to answer your question, yes, every new Tractor Supply needs the ability to do that.
I'm sorry, I keep asking the same thing about the propane tank, but I was able to find out propane tanks are prohibited in Old Bridge. And it's not under the zoning section, but it is under the fire prevention code. And it says that limits referred to section F 2800 of the fire prevention code, in which storage of flammable liquids in outside above ground tanks is prohibited. And I think it's, if I go through the whole section, I think it's only permitted in M3 heavy industrial zones. So that would be considered as a non-conforming use.
I'm not familiar with the zoning code, but I certainly have no reason to doubt what you're saying. I guess I would have to say we'd have to look at that, look at the zoning code, and find out whether that's going to be a deal killer for Tractor Supply, if indeed they cannot have the bulk propane sales.
Because the issue is, with the propane tank, if it's a non-conforming use, then you are at the wrong board.
Well, I think you just said that it's not in the zoning ordinance, though. It's apparently in another section.
But it clearly says that, in the next section, it says the limits referred to in section F 2800 of the Fire Prevention Code, in which new bulk plants for flammable or combustible liquids are prohibited, are hereby established as the entire township of Old Bridge, except for the M3 heavy industrial zone established by the zoning ordinance of the township of Old Bridge. I believe there was an application in the past, maybe Nicole can comment on that went to the zoning board.
There was an application for the BJ's along Route 9 northbound in Old Bridge Township that was for a propane filling tank. I believe that application was denied because One, it wasn't permitted in that zone, but number two, the filling station was basically in the parking lot of the BJ's along the front entrance, and the safety of, somebody then, driving, up and through the bollards and causing some sort of harm. And then there was a residential development of apartments pretty close by to that BJ's. So they were in front of the zoning board. When we had made the comment, it was basically, hey, what's the shape on your architectural plan? If there was a feature as significant as above-ground fueling tank, we would have put more into it. Quite honestly, our perception was, oh, must have been left off of their standard plans from a different application. So what we're saying is it's not permitted in the zone. Since it's not permitted, if you want to carry it within this application, you are in front of the zoning board and not the planning board.
Yeah, so our position would be that we certainly can't ask the board to grant an approval that it doesn't have the legal right to grant. So no sense debating that. I haven't had a chance to look at that ordinance. I realize that's just coming up now. Usually when there's a code requirement that's not in the zoning ordinance, it's not a use variance. However, any approval will be subject to all necessary outside agency approvals. So we can look at it more closely. And if it does require a use variance that Tractor Supply wants to pursue, then they'd have to go to the zoning board just for approval of the
Right.
propane above-ground storage tank. Maybe there's a way to put it underground. I don't know. That's definitely beyond my knowledge. We don't want to pull the application or table it to go to the zoning board because of an above-ground tank. We want to proceed tonight, subject to all necessary outside agency approvals. And certainly you've made that comment, and we'll have to address that in some way. But I'm not able to comment on more than that because I wasn't aware of it.
So as a part of this application, would you eliminate the propane tank?
I would say that it would have to be subject to obtaining all necessary additional approvals. And that may be a D variance. I would just want to reserve the right to look at that and question that. But whatever is required, we would have to get. I don't think we have to establish tonight what's required.
So any approval, if we got to that point, would include the possibility of you receiving an approval from all the appropriate boards, perhaps including the zoning board, in order to have the propane tank. And if not, then that would be carved down and would become not part of the approval.
Right.
But you could maintain the rest of it.
Right.
We could put it that way.
Yes, yes.
Okay, did you have any other comments? Nicole, or,
No, not of this witness.
okay, and you didn't have any more?
No.
Okay, anybody from the board, any questions?
Application to, after the approval of the zoning board. Because we don't know what required exactly from the zoning board, what kind of buffer, what kind.
I guess what they're saying is they've put all this much together, I think, they've put this much together, they'd prefer to get an approval, even if in the
Without
end,
fail.
it's gonna have to carve that out, and they would have to build without it. They haven't talked to the client about whether they can build, they're gonna, buy the store then, if they don't have it, so that might be one of the things that would happen. Obviously, if the zoning board told them that they had to change that entire area, then they need to come back to us. Then they couldn't build, then they couldn't move ahead with their plans. The zoning board said, no, you need to reconfigure that entire area before we're going to approve it. So then they need to come back to us to change that area. So, I mean, at some point, one board has to go first. So we can structure.
Usually the zoning board goes first and then it comes out.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
but since we've
We
heard,
should really move it until after the zoning board, I don't know.
you prefer to have it.
Typically, if we would have seen,
Yeah,
So, can you just, so everybody can hear and understand?
go ahead.
so typically, if we would have seen the propane tank on the site plan itself, we would have raised that as an issue, and we would have discussed it with the applicant that, this is not permitted and you need to go to the zoning board. But it was a feature on the plan which we didn't know what exactly that was. We didn't expect it to be a propane tank. So now that they have come in front of us, we've looked at the site plan, they could still choose to not have the propane tank put in unless they get an approval from the zoning board. and the zoning board could just look at the tank. I have myself not reviewed the past application, so I really don't know what the BJ's application was, but from what I read here, they might need a use variance, which they could go to the zoning board.
And then if that's denied, then the tank,
Then they can
They can.
proceed without it, or they maybe won't even buy the property then.
yeah.
Right.
And-
Question.
Yes, Mr. Payne.
I thought I heard that you read that propane tanks aren't allowed in the township of Oak.
In one zone, in one zone.
It's in the fire prevention code. It's not in the zoning code, it's in the fire prevention code, and it clearly says that storage of flammable above-ground tanks is prohibited.
Because we didn't know, I didn't flag this issue earlier, and I'm not familiar with these provisions either, and neither is their attorney. So we really need to go through, and that's part of it, to figure all that out. They are permitted in, even what she read, so they are permitted in some zones. So it's not an all-out prohibition. And my gut instinct is that this is not something that is fully regulated by the municipality, but there are state regulations on these that we're going to need to look at and they're going to need to comply with. So, and the fire code is usually a statewide document, not just, and then something that this town adopts. It's not just something that's just within the town. So we need to look at all of that. Yeah.
I heard you say something to the effect that if you can't have a propane tank, you don't know if the client should want to even think about building a tractor supply company without having a propane tank.
I would have to check with them. I have not been involved in a recent project where they've gone, it's never really been an issue. They've always been able to install that and get the permits. I've not been involved in a project where there was ever a question, so I don't know how they will react.
I got the impression that you weren't, I'm not blaming you, but you weren't sure that they would even want to build here if they couldn't have that.
Yeah, I apologize, I really don't know the answer to that.
This is my suggestion, why don't you find out all the different things before we all sit for a lot longer, give you a lot of information, and you may not even be, either your choice will be not to build here, or you may find out later on that there are different variances to get that propane tank there. And wasting your time, and I don't want to say wasting our time, but in essence, we don't even know where this is going, because you're the ones that may back out.
Well, I appreciate,
That's my opinion.
I understand, and I appreciate your opinion. We're here now, this is one discrete, limited area of the application. We would like to proceed, especially partially because Mr. Kettler's traveled here from Michigan, which is just a logistical issue. We recognize and agree that if we don't have the necessary approvals for the propane tank, it can't be built. Not sure what effect that'll have on the application, we just don't know. We would like to proceed with the testimony, we're almost finished the testimony, and try to wrap up. If the propane tank can't be built, then we'll have to see where that takes us. But we don't want to stop everything for that issue. I understand, thank you.
Okay, so at this point, it may very well be that you would withdraw the whole, or not act on the application if the propane tank doesn't work.
So our hope is that we get an approval tonight that'll have conditions, one of which will be the condition we just discussed about the propane tank. We'll then take that to Tractor Supply. We still have to get county approval as well, and, you know, the approvals that Mr. Seawald mentioned, and Tractor Supply will make a decision. That's our preference, because it's easier to present it to them if we can say, hey, this is approved, but here are the conditions, as opposed to, this might get approved, and here are the probable conditions. It's much less specific, definite. We'd like to address as much as we can.
And what is your advice as our attorney?
The applicants requested to go forward, and they're willing to, if necessary, withdraw the portion of it that wouldn't comply. We're going to allow them an avenue to try to get the approvals for that. So from a legal perspective, it works. It works. They're here, they want to proceed. We've got a busy agenda coming up the next couple of meetings, so getting them back on is also going to be an issue. How much longer do you have?
I have my traffic engineer, and we're finished.
logistically, it sort of makes sense to get the testimony out and get it on the record, and then they're gonna have to deal with the conditions. It may be that it never gets built, it may be that Tractor Supply says, you know, there's enough other competitors around that have this, we don't need it on this location, let's go forward. Or they may get a variance from the zoning department, so I mean, there's,
Okay,
I
and
think we'll
if,
put this much into it at this point.
and if the zoning board denies it, then that's the end of them having a propane?
Propane tank, but it's not the end of their ability to build
No,
this, or,
then they'd have to make a decision
or
as to
having
whether
another,
they...
or having another tenant that has similar requirements come in and use the property without that.
All right, so you're done with your testimony?
Yes,
Okay. And you have the traffic engineer coming?
I do. I didn't know if you opened it to the public for every witness or.
Oh, did you have any, yeah, do you want to come up? Do you have any questions of this?
Restate my name?
Yes.
Yeah.
James Curcio, CURCIO, 2 Mapleton Road in Old Bridge.
Thank you.
So I don't know if I'm allowed to ask you questions, but I'll make them more rhetorical. I get that you're asking about variances and propane tanks, and just fundamentally, you're going to allow, Old Bridge allow them to build this thing with chainsaws and all these things they're talking about next to homes. I just, that's where I'm struggling. Like, where do you, because I noticed my ward rep isn't here, and he lived, right, that's Ward 5, that's where we're at, and I've got to assume he'd say no to this. So, like, just flat out, why are we building these things? And it doesn't seem like you guys are asking those questions unless you did that already. But, like, why are we nitpicking at things when this thing in its entirety should not be here? And
Well, can I just answer that?
Sure.
I think, because it's zoned. It is zoned to allow this use.
It's a permitted use.
It is a permitted use.
Yeah.
They're not asking for zoning change or asking for, you know, if it wasn't permitted use, they wouldn't be before this board, they'd be before the zoning board. So it is a permitted, it isn't zoned residential, it's zoned commercial neighborhood.
But you can change that to residential, no?
No.
Well, not us, you have to go through a whole other process.
Right, so I guess what I'm getting at is, I don't care if it's, but when we bought it, it was a farm, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is completely different. You're going to force people to move, not you, right? But if the decision is
No, I
made
understand. It's
to
just,
build
you know.
this, like, I don't think about where you live, and I don't want to pry into your personal lives, but if somebody built this next to your house, you'd be here. You'd be saying the same thing. I'm young. I don't want to have to raise my kids with this in the background. So, and the other thing that I take absolute offense to is the propane tanks being prohibited is a discrete, limited issue. That's a huge issue. That thing could blow up. I work in insurance, so I know these things blow up. That thing can blow up, right? I don't need my family or the neighbors. That's closer to some of the other folks. It's just, it's frustrating to sit here and listen to these guys and right, they're trying to build something in my backyard coming from not Old Bridge, not even the state, to say, we're going to build it here. That's not fair. I don't go into somebody else's backyard and build something that is going to significantly inconvene them. Really, and just closing, and I don't know if I'll get a chance after the traffic one, and that's because that's really interesting. That is a huge issue for us, but it just sounds like they don't belong here. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the public? Okay, we'll go to the next witness.
It's Justin.
Can I have 5 minutes? Sorry.
Oh, okay, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Sorry, at least 10, just to stand up.
How about 10 or 15 minutes?
Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And state and spell your name for the record.
Justin Taylor, Taylor.
Thank
I'm with the firm of Dynamic Traffic. My purview of this project was to review the traffic and circulation of the project. By way of background, I don't believe I've testified before this board. However, I'm a licensed engineer in the state of New Jersey, as well as Pennsylvania and Texas. I've been practicing traffic planning for approximately the last 18 years. I'm also a certified professional traffic operations engineer through the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and I testified at dozens of boards throughout the state of New Jersey, both on behalf of applicants as well as boards.
Okay, thank you. We'll accept your...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Taylor, did you prepare a report, traffic study, that was submitted to the board with our application dated February 28th, 2018?
Yes, I did.
And are you familiar with this site and our proposal?
Yes, I am.
Can you tell the board what you looked at in your report?
Absolutely. My responsibility is really threefold when we're looking at an application. We need to determine whether the adjacent roadway network has sufficient capacity to handle the proposed use. We need to make sure that we can safely and efficiently access the site, as well as navigate throughout the parking areas and the loading zones. And we do really need to make sure that there's enough parking. So to unpack that a little bit, to figure out if there's the capacity there, we need to figure out what type of traffic is currently traveling along the roadways, and we need to figure out how much traffic our new use is going to generate. To get the traffic, the background, what we do is conduct traffic counts. We went out and conducted traffic counts in January during the evening rush hour and the Saturday midday shopping peak hour, because those represent peaks not only of the roadway, but also of the proposed use. We also then correlated that data with NJDOT volumes that are currently provided along Englishtown Road. Once we get that background data, we then contact the municipality to see if there's any adjacent developments that might need to be utilized. When we did that back in January, there was indicated there really weren't any projects that should be included in this analysis. But above and beyond that, we kind of look at a belt and suspenders type of approach. The New Jersey Department of Transportation provides background growth rates for different types of roadways throughout the state and different areas throughout the state of New Jersey. And we took that growth rate and applied it to the build year where we thought we were going to go out, just to kind of make sure that if there was anything that was missed, we're going to incorporate that background traffic and surcharge it onto the roadway.
All right, let me interrupt you there. Did you look at AM peak hour trips, and if not, why not?
We did not look at the morning peak hour because it's a much lower traffic generator for this specific use. It actually generates about 15 to 20% of what it would during a PM or a Saturday peak hour. And so we did not feel that it was necessary to really determine whether this was going to have a negative impact on the roadway.
So Tractor Supply's traffic is much lighter in the morning peak hour than it is in the evening or Saturday peak hours, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so is it safe to say that you looked at the impact of the Tractor Supply on the evening and Saturday peak hour, you drew conclusions from that, which we'll talk about, but the AM you didn't look at because you knew it would be much less because of the way Tractor Supply operates?
That's correct.
Now, this is a permitted use, is it not?
Yes, it is.
And the law does not permit off-site traffic conditions as a basis to deny a site plan application when it's permitted use.
That's correct.
Okay. But we want to know, and the board wants to know, especially if it relates to any of the variances that we do request, whether this use is going to have a substantial negative impact on the surrounding roadway conditions from a traffic standpoint, right?
Correct.
Is Tractor Supply a heavy traffic user or generator?
No, it's actually a very light traffic generator per square foot, as other retail uses that might be constructed in this area.
Can you quantify that for the board a little bit, like as to how many trips we think Tractor Supply will generate in the evening and Saturday peak hours?
Absolutely. We would look to the Institute of Transportation Engineers publication, Trip Generation, to determine what the development would generate. And what you're looking at is during the evening peak hour, approximately 45 cars, or 90 trips, 45 in, 45 out. And on the weekend, you're looking at about 65 trips, or 65 vehicles, 133 trips during that time, or about a car a minute during the busiest time on a Saturday.
Okay. And how does that relate to other retail?
If you were to put other type of commercial, I would see it being 2 or 3 times that at least.
Okay. Did you look at the level of service for the proposed driveway as shown on our plan, what it would likely be using those traffic trip generation assumptions along Englishtown Road?
Yeah, based upon the existing volumes along the roadway, grown by the peak hour factors, and the trip generation associated with the site, looking at levels of service C or better for the driveway.
And that's a good level of service, is it not?
That's an excellent level of service in the state of New Jersey.
And what impact, if any, will the Tractor Supply have on the level of service or delays at the intersection of Englishtown Road and Mapleton Road?
We find no change in the levels of service and a maximum increase in delay of approximately 2 seconds.
Is that a significant increase in delay?
Absolutely not.
And it doesn't change the level of service?
That's correct.
Now, the trips that ITE estimates that Tractor Supply will generate here, will that have a material adverse effect on the surrounding roadway system?
No, it will not.
Now, this is a busy road, isn't it?
It is.
And so why won't the Tractor Supply, why don't you believe it'll have a significant adverse impact on that road?
Well, based upon the distribution that's available to travel north and south along the roadway and get to the points of where the residents would be coming from, what we find is it disperses rather quickly. What we're talking about is, like I said, 60 cars, maybe half of them coming from the north, half of them coming from the south. So really what you're talking about during that busiest hour is about 30 cars, a car every 2 minutes. And so really that won't have any noticeable impact or really any visible impact whatsoever if you were driving on the roadways.
And this use is not only permitted, but also supported by the master plan, is that correct?
That's correct.
Have you had a chance to look at whether the proposed access and site circulation is safe and efficient?
I have. What we would do is take a look both at what the ordinance requires as well as what is necessary to circulate the largest vehicle that we have for deliveries. What we would use is what we call a WB67 or a 53-foot trailer, the biggest trailers that are out there to deliver about twice a week for this site. And we've designed the aisle width to accommodate that safely throughout the entire the site layout. We've also ensured that the parking layout and aisle width are sufficient for passenger vehicles to enter and exit the parking spaces.
Okay. Are you aware that we need a variance for the number of parking spaces?
I am.
And we require 128 spaces, but we are only providing 75 spaces.
That's correct.
Have you had a chance to study that variance?
Absolutely. I mean, we have taken a look based both on the information provided by the applicant, who has developed numerous ones of these, with the 75 being about what he said with the sweet spot. But again, we also look back to the ITE publication parking generation. And what they would utilize for a site this size was actually about 2.7 spaces per thousand for a maximum demand, which translates into about 52 spaces required. So I feel completely comfortable that this site is parked sufficiently to handle whatever demand might be generated by the development.
The parking counts that you did, you said they were in January.
The traffic counts, that's correct.
Excuse me, did I say parking? I apologize. The traffic counts in January, correct?
That's correct.
What day in January?
We did Tuesday, January 16th, and Saturday, January 20th.
Okay. Now, Tuesday, January 16th, was that the day after Martin Luther King Day?
It was.
Okay. Is it acceptable traffic engineering practice to conduct studies on a weekday that is not a holiday, and also, of course, on a Saturday, because you want to determine the Saturday peak?
Yes, it is. We would not want to count specifically on that holiday, but after the holiday, we feel that it is applicable.
Is there any other findings that we haven't, are there any other findings that we haven't covered that you looked at that you want to share with the board?
I believe that we've touched on the parking and how we feel that the parking is sufficient. We've touched on the operation of the driveway, showing that there is the capacity in the adjacent roadway network to handle this additional traffic. And we've touched on the design and circulation of the site, which will allow for safe and efficient access to the project.
Okay. And we're subject to county approval. This is a county road, is it not?
That's correct.
And the county has jurisdiction as to access?
Yes, and we have designed the driveway in full conformance with all county standards.
And we will obtain county approval.
That's correct.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have for Mr. Taylor at this point.
Nicole or Lena?
I don't have any.
Chairwoman Cannon, when I looked at the traffic report, and I looked at the existing traffic volumes that they had calculated, it was based on, yes, one manual count that was done on the Tuesday, the day after Martin Luther King Day, for a 2-hour duration so that they could find the peak weekday volume. So one day, and yes, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I would have laid out that traffic counter on this busy road that has an extreme amount of volume, especially during Raceway Parkway park events. I would lay it out for a week and find the true peak for that roadway. So that was my first concern, manual movements on a weekday for 2 hours. And then they picked a Saturday 4 days later after, to do another 2 days of what they felt was the peak because of typical of what maybe IT, maybe typical for a traffic engineer standard, but I can't even fathom to find the peak based on one day of a 2-hour count, you know? So that was my first concern. I wanted to see traffic counters lay out for a week period to find the true peak hours, morning and afternoon, for that roadway. Dawn, can you put up that quick map that I had done? I had put together just the aerial for 527, and I wanted to put the site in relationship to some of the intersections that are adjacent. I actually do have a printout for the board of this, and I don't know, Dawn, what exhibit number are we on?
Well,
6, well,
why don't we call this boards 1 or B1?
So in the orange on the top, in the center of the screen, I had labeled the property in question and where the Tractor Supply Company would go. They analyzed the intersection of Mapleton Road and County Route 527, which is circled in the solid red, sort of like at the center. On one of the pages of the traffic report, they had, said that they had consulted with our planning staff to see if there was any future developments or anything that was approved along County Route 527. What I have circled or outlined in that orange square is the commercial component for the Red Shaw development, which is a single-family home residential development. That's the commercial component that's in the front. That was approved, and I want to say 2009, they came in for the amended approval on that application. That commercial component has 3 retail buildings and a pad site. And I think the total is either 35,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet for the commercial component. So I'd like the traffic report to, 1, be updated so that we can get true counts for the roadway, so we could see what the true peak of the roadway is weekday and weekend, to include the future development for that approval of Red Shaw Village, the commercial site. One of the good things that's going for this application for the Tractor Supply Company is the intersection just off the page to the right, where you see a sliver of John Wall Road where it intersects with County Route 527. There's actually going to be a realignment of that to be a true 4-way intersection with a signal that we're working with the developers of Woodhaven on to realign with Matchaponix Road. That intersection will have a signal there, so it'll provide greater gaps in that traffic, so that there's sort of like that platoon that comes by instead of just the constant flow. So that's definitely a positive for the driveway access for this development. When I looked at the statement on the parking, one of the things that came to me is, they say that it should be noted that the IT identifies a peak parking demand of 2.7 spaces per 1,000. I go back to the land use code that they were using in the beginning of the report, where it says land use code 815 for freestanding discount stores in the ITE publication 10th edition. When I look at the parking edition of the ITE underneath that, yes, for the Saturday, that factor is 2.7, but their study is a much larger store, and it's a discount store. So certainly there's no land use for Tractor Supply, and this is very, sort of like a niche. It's not even, when I was looking at the land use codes before I even got to the traffic report, I was more looking at small hardware stores. If I went to the land use code and I looked at, and I have it somewhere here, I think it was land use 812 or 813. Here we go. Building materials and lumber stores, where they had outside display areas. Their size for their study areas when they were doing these were 26,000 gross floor area in suburban and urban sites were about 11,000 square feet. So when you take a look at that, you know, and you look at those parking supply ratios, they were more in line with 3.8, 2.4. The square footage, the ratio was more in line with this type of application. When you do the math, it does come out to be 75. So although I don't agree with the discount store, there are land uses in the ITE that would support the 75 spaces. When they say that their stores work with the 75 spaces, I like to see that because, again, when Vina and I were looking online and we were looking at Google Earth imagery of these parking lots, they were shared parking. When I was on the phone a couple hours ago with Josh before this application, he said, no, there's one in Tinton Falls and there's one here, and we were quickly trying to Google, but they're too new to see. That should be supplied, you know, within that traffic report to show, because these are record documents. If somebody down the line picks up, if one of the residents down the line who's not in this meeting picks up any of these reports, that documentation should be in here to support the application. It shouldn't be that they're looking through our technical memorandums to find that information. So that's why I asked for a revised traffic report, to show us the traffic, the existing real traffic data along County Route 527, to incorporate the proposed development along 527 just across the street north of this site, to take into consideration Raceway Park and the traffic generated. And it's not the racing events, it's the auctions, it's the flea markets. There's many events throughout the year. They try to utilize every inch of that place. It should be in this traffic study. What you see right where my north arrow is on the plan is that's pointed to a wooded area. That wooded area will be age-restricted multifamily. That has come in front of this board called Texas Plaza 3, with a commercial component, with an office building. There is a lot of activity surrounding here that's not developed yet, but it's on its way. They just cleared site. So there's a lot of things in this traffic report I'd like to see revised and submitted back to us. And I would ask that it would be submitted before this board acts on this application.
Hey, did you have any response to it?
Yes, I do. So I certainly appreciate Mr. Shapiro's comments. A couple things. Now, as a practical matter, we're here tonight. If the board wants to table this application and make us do additional traffic studies, you can do it. I can't stop you from doing it. The reason why I don't think we have to do it and that we can make it a condition of approval are as follows. Number one, I believe, and Mr. Taylor, you correct me if I'm wrong, you did the counts when you did and for the duration that you did, because those coincide with our peak hour. Is that correct?
They coincide with our peak hour as well as the typical peak hour on the roadways and the identified peak hours along 527 based on DOT data.
Okay, so why didn't you initially leave the traffic counter out there for a week as suggested?
We physically do manual counts to get the turning movements at the intersection. So there's a physical counter sitting there during these peak hours. And we don't typically have them count for more than 2 or 3 hours at a time to encompass that. But also based on the historical data that was available by NJDOT, we narrowed in on that 2-hour commuting hour and that Saturday midday peak hour to be able to really pinpoint what the critical time of analysis would be.
So how did you know what the peak hour was?
We looked at the peak hour, we determined the peak hour of the count based on the actual physical counts that were done. The historical data along 527 provided by NJDOT gives you 2 full days, 24-hour counts, northbound, southbound traffic. And that fell basically within that 4:30 to 6:30 time.
And then, as far as the land use code, why did you use the land use code that you did, as opposed to a different land use code?
So we have been directed by the New Jersey Department of Transportation to utilize the discount superstore land use for Tractor Supplies within New Jersey. As we've all stated, it's kind of its own animal, and it's not directly correlatable to any one specific one. But that's the guidance we've been given by NJDOT for utilization within the state.
Okay, and that relates both to parking, or IT's estimated parking demand or need, as well as trip generation?
Not exactly, because the DOT does not really govern what goes on a site. However, the correlation can be drawn. And I do agree with Ms. Shapiro's analysis that, maybe building supply is similar. What we would say is the supply that it gives is about 75 spaces. If you were to look at the